Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Minahan and her panel of guests bring you leading-edge astrology conversations through a journey of soul growth patterns connecting astrology's energetic cycles. Get ready to understand your path in the cosmic roots of the stars.
Hello, and welcome to Talk Cosmos, insightful conversations awaken your consciousness. I'm Sue Minahan, the founder and host of Talk Cosmos, and today we have a panel with a special guest that's joining us, and today is August 6th. We're in summer, as many of you know, with the climate, and I hope it's treating you well and you have relief. This subject today is about the Venus retrograde. There's a lot involving Venus because when she retrogrades, which is the most unusual of all the planets to retrograde in her 19-month cycle, it involves a long transit, a good 4 months. And it's powerful because Venus involves what we desire. Don't we have a lot of emotions and desires for a lot? Our subject is actually titled Venus Retrograde, Leo's Heart Path. With that said, all these details will get involved, and we are now ready for our panel, Planet Buzz.
Focusing on planetary ecliptic orbital cycles and planetary pairs called synodic cycles connecting the planets at the same degree that begin our relationship, these are the members of Planet Buzz.
I'm Sue Minahan, the founder of Talk Cosmos, an eclectic evolutionary astrologer, consultant, certified color energy life coach, member of the Washington State Astrological Association, member of Kepler Astrology Toastmaster Club, of a Dwarf Planet University diploma and AA with music degree. I love mythology, philosophizing, collaboration. I'm an artist, writer, a perpetual student of life.
And I'm Dr. Laura Todd. Holding a PhD in human science, I am a spiritually oriented psychological astrologer with students and clients worldwide. As a counselor, writer, and educator, I love helping people recognize their inner strengths, take advantage of auspicious moments, and navigate times of challenge with greater ease. I firmly believe in supporting people of all ages to actualize their full potential. While I have many tools, techniques, and modalities from which I pull, my clients are the ones who implement and embody the insights and changes I have to offer. On my own podcast, Mythic Sky Storytime, I discuss astrology, mythology, and actualizing our full potential.
And as the ancient Hermetic code reveals,
As below, so above. As above, so below.
Thank you, Laura. Since March 2020, it's always been a pleasure. And let's have our special guest, Adam Gainsburg, author of The Light of Venus. Adam is a leading astrologer on Mars and Venus, their cycles, their phases, the lunar nodes, Chiron, and Pluto. Adam actually formulated sky astrology, because the sky is our basic resource, and let's bring it back to a living, breathing universe. He's co-founder of Sky Astrology Conferences, and I need to get that onto my newsletter because that's an exciting process, although Canada has many sky parties. He's a consultant. He guest lectures. In fact, he'll be on this today also because I will say full disclosure, pre-recording this, although we're always usually 100%, because Adam is involved with the special Venus webinar that Cosmic Intelligence Agency is putting on. So cue into that, please. He's the author of 4 books, Light of Venus, Chiron, Signs of the Times, and that is that's not wrong, and Sacred Marriage Astrology. And he was nominated for a Lifetime Achievement Award in Theory and Understanding at 2018 UAC, which is the United Astrology Conference. There's another one's in the makings for years ahead. Thank you, Adam. It's such a treat. We're really glad to have you. Oops, you're muted.
I was just saying it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, indeed. And I have 2 slides for Laura and myself in case any of you are interested. It helps to see the things. It is Mythic Sky. And you'll want to know that because she has a couple of retreats that she's mentioning ahead. And this is myself. Always, you can get a hold of me at Talk Cosmos. And here we are, Leo, the full 9 yards of Leo. Time to be playful at its best, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's so we're in, right, the sun's in Leo, but that this particular Venus retrograde that we're going to be talking about today also takes place in Leo. And I think one of the things that's interesting with this particular retrograde is, although there's been lots of Venus retrogrades in Leo since the 50s, this is the first one that's entirely in Leo.
We will bring that up. That
And
is
so
so
that's
true.
part of why looking at this archetype becomes, I think, interesting and significant to this particular retrograde. And maybe even just for folks listening to explain, and some of this, Adam, I learned with your talk at WASA years ago, in terms of what's actually going on with retrograde from an astronomical perspective.
Yeah,
Right, that people often don't understand. They think like, wait, the planet's moving backwards through the sky, which is it's not physically suddenly changing course, right?
It's
it just
apparent.
appears that way.
Right.
Apparent.
And that optical illusion that it creates in its closest proximity to Earth.
Right.
Very, very true, Laura. It is true. And that's a very valuable reminder for us. Centering just on what it means, though, to have Venus in Leo, it is a time where our heart is center stage. And along with that, Leo, because it involves a stage, we often have roles that we want to embrace and that we want others to embrace, which is sometimes its shadow side. But it is a leadership, and it is a time to claim manifestation. Did you have some thoughts there, Adam? I see you.
Yeah, regarding the Leo archetype through Venus, that I'm glad you mentioned, Sue, the shadow side, because every sign has, in every culture, through every period in history, because cultures themselves evolve, has a shadow expression and a light or a accepted expression. And these days, to me, Leo is really a lot of people, even young people these days, are finding or are just being supported by parents, by culture, to get out there and express themselves, to be themselves, to not be afraid of lots of attention on them, on their quirkiness, on their uniqueness. So I think that's really, really helpful. And at the same time, sort of bridging kind of into the shadow, is I'm seeing a lot of people becoming a bit attached to and starting to over-identify with how much they are being seen and recognized. And when that line starts to be crossed, that's no longer Leo. That's now a suppressed or a distorted expression of what might be called a more embodied or mature expression of the archetype. I mean, shadow, Laura, what would you say? Like, to me, the shadow of an archetype absolutely is included in the archetypal definition.
Absolutely. I mean, it's with Leo, right? That it can be ego strength, which we all need and is really important, and egoic and narcissistic, right? Both of that is Leo.
Exactly.
And so that Leo can have that self-absorbed, grandiosity, look at me, aren't I fabulous part to it. Yes. And it can be that ego strength that, look at me, aren't I fabulous? Yes,
I love that. Yes. I love that. To me, people who fall into the first category, they kind of look at me, I'm better than others, the narcissism. I've learned a lot about narcissism recently from a colleague. We're actually doing an event live in California in next month, and he's taught me that narcissism is the absence of empathy for others.
Good point. Good point.
It's the inability to feel for another person. Now that's not wrong, but that's just, it's like a weakened or less developed muscle. So that distinction that you make, Laura, and I love how you use the exact same words to make the distinction. Like that's exactly what this is. So that's why this kind of deeper archetypal use of astrology really requires a lot of honesty in ourselves. We really need to hold a very high bar for, let's say, am I in the embodied, healthy kind of expression of Leo, or am I still relying on approval from others, on being seen in order to validate my own self-love?
It's the me versus the we. And I know, Laura, you have a thought, but I'm wanting to get, I think
that's part of that Aquarian polarity, right?
Yes.
It's the approval of the group so that you can shine, as opposed to I can shine with autonomy.
Beautiful.
And that's where it all goes within. And this entire experience of Venus in her retrograde offers that chance to totally review our own values, our desires. How are they in place with the world exterior? I mean, both of you this is excellent. And Inanna, as I might just share with our audience, is the ancient name for who Venus really represents. Language changes, but her mythology is so large because it totally acknowledges this fact that Venus, the brightest in the sky besides the moon and sun, the luminaries, as we call them, shifts from being the morning star to the evening star. And that relates greatly to what Adam's work has been done.
Yeah, that shift, speaking of archetypes, that shift to me really is embodied in when Venus starts the cycle as a morning star. She is the queen of heaven, as her name literally translates in some of the ancient subdialects of Sumerian and the older languages. She's the queen of heaven. She goes through this long process of releasing her body in order to qualify and be able to enter into the underworld, the world of non-form, or what we call death. But when she reemerges as an evening star, she is no longer the queen of heaven. She's gone through something. She's gone through a rite, R-I-T-E. She's gone through an initiation where she now has touched and experienced death, and she's emerged. And now she becomes, as an evening star, the queen of heaven and earth. Because now she knows earth, meaning she knows things that arise, that are created like earth, and that will eventually die and be destroyed, earth. And that difference archetypally between queen of heaven, untested, immortal, eternal, everything unchanging, everything always available, into the recognition and the appreciation for things that end, is a big time teaching for how to understand basically the Venus cycle and all of her phases in it. Because each of us are born in one of these 13 phases within the whole cycle. So half of them are in morning sky, half of them are in evening sky.
And she's currently in that transition right now. She's evening star. And
yes.
So we're in this death, rebirth, rejuvenation period, right? That she's moving back to go into the underworld, to go into the cave as she gets closer and closer to the sun, right? Yeah. Then she becomes invisible, and then will return as the queen.
Yes.
Right. There's that Phoenix rising, almost, the cycle that she's
completely
moving into.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Laura. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I find it most fascinating to realize initially when I first learned of this cycle that you introduced, which is so powerful, that it begins with the retrograde, remembering that Venus herself is backwards. I mean, like Uranus, it spins backwards.
Right.
It's the most fascinating thought. Sometimes I really feel like that could be the more appropriate way to spin, and the rest of the planets are perhaps backwards. I'm not sure.
That's an interesting point. So to me, like that's a question like above my consciousness pay grade. All I know is we Earthlings, we spin really fast. So Venus is incredibly balancing because she spins, like you say, backwards and the slowest rotational speed of all of the main planets in our solar system. So she is like the, on one way of saying antithesis, but she's also the balance, which is a classic word that we astrologers ascribe to Venus itself. This balancing, she's hardly spinning. She takes it, it takes Venus longer to turn once on her axis than it does to her go all around the sun once.
Boy, thanks.
And that is like literally the antipod of the Earth, who's spinning so fast and going around the Earth rather, at the same clip. Like we just assume that our biorhythms are like universal. They're not. They're entirely predicated on Gaia, entirely. So like Laura was saying, right now Venus is completing what I refer to as the Capricorn cycle of Venus. The last 19-month cycle includes this station retrograde that happened on the 22nd of July, and this Capricorn cycle will complete at or on August 13th, when Venus aligns between Earth and Sun. So if you can feel that or imagine that, we're on Earth looking at the Sun, Venus is in between us. And that's the start of the Phoenix rising that Laura was just mentioning. She's really just coming into this whole new cycle. This is what I call her inception phase, or like being conceived anew. Yeah, great. So like this, these are all the dates and the degrees and everything.
Good.
But this, Laura, I'm very interested. I've been wanting to mention this to you. For thousands of years, sky watching cultures have ascribed more of the death and rebirth mythology to our moon, and less to the Venus. But now, because we're so astronomically literate in our solar system, and we're so, meaning sophisticated and all that, I think, and also human consciousness itself is evolving and being challenged to evolve. I think that conversation is being more pinned to the Venus cycle, not just the lunar cycle. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that, I could see, just even if we're moving outside of our astrology bubble, right, and the community of astrologers that talk about it, that, I think there's a greater consciousness. It's part of a broadening of even the feminine, right, and how that's perceived culturally. And so it's not the simply maternal, or that even who gets to be maternal is broadening too. Right now, it's not just genderfied.
Yes.
And
Beautiful.
And so then looking at these other feminine and the complexity of Venus as an archetype, that it's not the Madonna horror archetype of Sun Venus or of Moon Venus that can sometimes be interpreted, but that Venus has a lot of layers to her, particularly depending on which pantheon you're unpacking.
That's a very good point, because there's plenty of pantheons these days to choose from.
But that, you look at the story of Inanna much more complex than some of the other stories.
Yes.
Right. And the layers of who she is.
Yes,
and so and the value, and maybe some of it too, just the idea of that traveling under that dark night of the soul that's become more of a ubiquitous term with Jung and with psychology, of the value of that. And so rather than seeing, that disappears and it's hidden, you don't talk about it. It's like, oh no, that's where everything is rich and juicy and yummy, and so much possibility is in that space, and that being valued in a different way, I think gives space for more of exploring that versus avoiding what is hidden. It's that's where the potentiality is.
I completely agree with you. In fact, and what I found a challenge as a counselor, not just as an astrologer, right? I found a great challenge in the predisposition for human beings to assume we know. And that assumption can oftentimes block the availability to those rich and juicy, sometimes very challenging times of transformation in the underworld, because we're going in there going, oh yeah, I've been here, done this already. But if we go in more open more feminine, men and women equally, then we really have the availability to take advantage of what you're saying.
Yeah. This consciousness, to me, it is an unfolding. And what your work here is demonstrating, as it's related to the processing that we've known of the phases of the lunar phase. You know, every 28 days it goes from new moon to full moon, and in between all its 4 to 8 whatever phases, has been related with Venus in its intricacies of, and in other words, it's reflecting the whole consciousness that is elevating and expanding to be more inclusive instead of the black and white. But there's so many reasons for it. And this so important, particularly when you think of the fact that we're moving into 200 years of air with the grand conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn as one indication from 2020 on. And then we have Pluto that will be in air as of January 11th next year. But the point being that, remember the point, Sue? I'm sorry, as I was tying all these things together. But I am saying that, it's deconditioning. It's deconditioning.
Yes.
And that's what you're expressing.
Yes.
Shall we look at some of these charts and see?
Yeah,
But I am interested in just mentioning to people there of the 13 in this wonderful book that both Laura and I have read of Adams, of the Light of Venus, that these first 3 are immediate. They relate to each. I think that's where I'm not quite clear, but each of these experiences that we're showing, that the 22nd of July is the inception as it immediately is retrograde, and then
No.
Okay.
The station retrograde begins the ending of a cycle. So that starts what's called the completion phase. So on 22nd of July, Venus for me entered her completing phase. Once she disappears, she's retrograde and now 10 degrees or less from the sun, approaching the sun, that's the transition phase.
Okay.
Each of these phases, like all of them, have very specific archetypal meanings for each of our inner feminines.
And they do. I know mine happens to be an evening star, and I'm in the rebirth, which correlates for my own personal recollection. It's a fascinating, wonderful way to explore. This is when Venus actually went apparent retrograde or stationary retrograde. It was July 22nd, and in Eastern time, 9:33 in the evening at 28 degrees 36, which is important because it indicates the path of her retrograde. And I might just share immediately that the tension of action is tremendously for evolution with Pluto, the transformative energies, recognizing what is shadow that is not allowing us to be in our empowerment, power versus no power, is in tension with the lunar nodes, which for folks is our collective past, and which has just entered into the cardinal energies of self, Aries, and others of Libra. So it's the whole dynamics.
So there's 2 things I want to mention about this chart, if I may. First is whenever a planet stations retrograde, what's actually happening astronomically is we are perceiving that planet as not moving because we are perceiving, because that planet and us on Earth are moving at the same rate. So we're actually matched in orbital velocity, apparent orbital velocity. That's why it appears that a planet stops moving. So we're matched. Now, if you think about that, that's not a factor that astrologers use. Actual speed of a planet to determine if it's strong or weak. But this is a speed of a planet, brightness of a planet, how close the planet is to Earth. These are all something that I brought forward a number of years ago called the sky factors of every planet. And this is so, but just speaking about here, that this is really what's happening when a planet is stationed. we are actually tracking, we're actually moving together around, and it appears like we're not moving at all. Or it appears like the planet's not moving at all. That's the first thing I want to share. The second thing is I was so happy to see that you brought up this chart, Sue, because this chart, I led a whole webinar, whenever that was ago, on the 22nd, and I call this alignment the dark cross of 2023. This was Pluto opposite the sun, which means Pluto at that moment was closest to Earth than it ever gets in the entire year. It was Pluto was closest, as the crow flies, or as the Corvus constellation flies, to Earth than it ever gets. While at the same time, at that anorectic 29th degree, it's squaring the nodes who have, like you said, just entered cardinal. This complex cross, this grand cross, created both an evolutionary force, but also that evolutionary force in the direction of Dharma, in the direction of life purpose. So anyway, it was very, very powerful. I mean, even working up my comments and the graphics that I used to prepare for this webinar a week or whatever before was like really changing things in my consciousness and in my body. It was, and we will continue to be playing out the effects of whatever choices we were making consciously and unconsciously at that moment on the 22nd.
I love it. What webinar was that, if people want to buy it?
Yeah, it's on my website, and it's just called the Dark Cross of 2023. You can just look it up in the search bar.
Good.
Yeah, and it's a whole video download it's over 2 hours, I think. Yeah. So those are the two things I just wanted to mention. Like, this event, while also being Venus's station, is while Saturn is opposite Mars. I mean, there's so much happening here, both the feminine polarity in us and the masculine polarity in us, with Pluto at perigee with the sun and the nodes. Like, there's too much for the human brain to kind of interpret. We have to live it out and play it out over the coming months to see really where we are. It's very powerful.
Laura, if you had a thought, I guess we need to break, but this is
and we'll come back. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back.
Okay.
I've got stuff to say, but I think it'll
and there's so much ahead. Thank you so much. This is beautiful. All right, we will return with the PowerPoints, and thank you everybody for Planet Buzz with Adam Gainsburg, Dr. Laura Tad, and myself. Thanks. We'll be back. Thanks.
While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the Yang period of Leo, ruled by the solar sun. Having departed from a cycle based on the internal process of emotional attachments requiring security and safety, the energy of Leo externally manifests our legacy through children and artistic creations. As a fixed Yang fire sign that desires to ignite actualization, Leo the lion takes the risk to generously exhibit love and welcome all to share their stage with joyous pleasure for living life.
This is Martha Norwalk. Every Sunday morning, beginning at 9 a.m., thanks in part to the Ananda Institute of Living Yoga, we cover the world of animals. This week, August 13th,
Talk Cosmos brings you leading-edge astrological conversations with hour-long programs each week on KKNW. The show goes live every Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific. Talk Cosmos weekly programs are also available to watch live on Facebook and YouTube, along with daily chats throughout the week on the Talk Cosmos YouTube channel. While you're there, make sure you click like and subscribe buttons so you can get the full Talk Cosmos experience. Or, if you'd rather listen to the show archives with audio only, the entire podcast collection since 2018 is available on most podcast carriers. So, grab your coffee, tea, or kombucha and enjoy the show.
Talk radio that will get you thinking. Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi, we are back. Immediately after the break, we always come up with asking a brief but wonderful question, asking each panelist what's happening in the future for people to know about. Adam, we'll start with you. What do you have, please?
I think you're muted still, Adam.
I know details.
I spend my life on the computer with clients, and I still sometimes forget to unmute.
I know.
For me, Sue, the big focus, because I'm so focused on Venus and Mars, both psycho-emotionally, but also archetypally and tantrically, that coming up in November, Mars is completing its cycle with the sun in the middle of November. And it will conjoin the sun, or the sun will catch up to Mars, if you look at our charts, in the middle of Scorpio. And that, to me, is going to start the next 2-year cycle, because the Mars-Sun cycle is give or take 2 years each time. And this is going to mean, with Mars in its traditionally home sign of Scorpio, a lot of people are going to be busting out of either what they've needed to bust out of for a very long time, or they're believing that is a limitation and they need to bust out of it. This is going to be where people interested in transformation, healing, reconciliation, the ending of conflict, the ending of enemies, the ending of what I call othering, in order to find answers more deeply in their own truth, which means more responsibility for their own experience, more authority of their own experience. And that's going to be a 2-year process. Now,
Adam, I love it. I thank you. You took me off guard because I was expecting you to bring up the classes that you're giving later this month. But I am so glad.
People can go to my website and they can find the classes.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love this. And I'm right in step with you. Everything is personal accountability, and what a great chance. Thank you so much.
And one more thing, just to be balanced in this. Mars in Scorpio Mars is not going to be in Scorpio for 2 years, but the overall archetypal theme of the masculine in us through Mars is going to be the scorpionic dimension of the archetype, which means that there's going to be some very intense times coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Actions, Mars, taken without a lot of forethought, Mars. Maybe be happening both in a small, immediate, like local, or personal life scale, but also on a bigger scale. So I don't want to paint a kind of an unrealistic rosy picture, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that might be happening here that we're going to find even very difficult to deal with moving forward.
You know, it's true. Scorpio represents the power of life, and as we know through that transition, it's intense is a true word, meaning how you experience other people's actions in one's own. Anyway, It's a huge subject.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Laura, I know you have a retreat coming up that you wanted to bring focus to.
So just like this past winter, where I was in Nicaragua with a longtime friend, where we were running a goddess awakening retreat. We're going to be doing it again next year in February. So it'll be the February 10th through the 17th. It's in Nicaragua. I don't have it yet up on my website, but it'll be there soon. And it's up there as I think a past event that'll lead you to her website, where you can register. But so it's a week in Nicaragua, and every morning starts with yoga, and then there's a workshop that I'll be doing around experiential astrology and personal mythology. There's usually an afternoon event that you get to choose if you want to go horseback riding or zip lining in the jungle, or things along those lines. And I do private sessions in the afternoons as well. And we're right on the beach. You can see Costa Rica from the beach. We're that close to the border, and it's gorgeous. You get to see baby turtles run into the sea. And if you're lucky, a mama come up and lay
We will find out all about this as the months go ahead. We will get back to Nathan. Okay, let's go to this. This is the Venus star point. And I will just bring up briefly, there are the two dynamics. I don't need to, because we have other earlier programs all about the Venus star point itself, that it makes within 8 years this five petal rose. But the point for this show today, that design, is that the sun and Venus are meeting exactly at 12 degrees, 12 minutes.
On the 20 degrees.
Yeah, 20 degrees Leo.
On the 13th.
Yeah. It's
you're on this third.
Oh, I'm on the
she goes
rats.
direct.
Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah.
Okay, I was wondering, what am I looking at? Okay, thank you very much. Help is needed. 20 degrees and 28 minutes on August 13th, and Eastern time 7:09 and 44 seconds, if we want to be somewhat exact.
And so there's two things I wanted to say about this chart, because to me, because I base all my work with Venus on the cycle, the entire 19-month cycle, that just for me, I begin it at the retrograde Venus conjunction with the sun to the next one. This is the retrograde conjunction with the sun. And if you look here, Venus is a 20 Leo, but is retrograding. That means after this moment, it will then be 19, then 18, then 17. She is appearing to move backwards in our zodiac. And if you look right here, she is applying very closely to a trine with Chiron at the moment of the conjunction with the sun. That means that the trine dynamic, the trine relationship between Chiron and the trine quality brings in a Chironic quality to this entire cycle at its inception, at its beginning. It's kind of like this, everybody. Everybody like watching this, you probably know your own chart. So you know your birth date and time. But did you ever consider that your life did not start at your birth? Your life started 9 months earlier, and casting in a conception chart. So nobody does that, because there was no self at the conception. But here there is, because these are all archetypes, as Laura is so good at teaching and counseling through. Like, these are archetypes. These are broader collective intelligences that are playing out through humanity at this time. So this Chiron thing is all about opening your heart and getting in touch with old pain in order to heal it and forgive and move on in more joy and love. That's what this trine is really talking about. And then I wrote it down here. And then on the 22nd of August, Venus will then square Jupiter. Exactly.
Oh, yes.
And that's also within her retrograde period. So when Venus is closer to the Earth like this, whenever she's retrograde, any aspect she makes is very much stronger, because she's literally closer to us in the sky. So this is going to be another thing that's going to expand, intensify, that's going to accelerate the effects of this Venus cycle. It's going to be a heart Chiron thing, wound into medicine. It's also going to be a Jupiter acceleratory. It's going to be like an acceleratron of the feminine principle demanding to come out through men, women, and however we are defining ourselves as, through the entire 19 months. This goes all the way through this year, all through next year, and into the following year. These themes are being seeded now.
And I think with that, so looking at it archetypally, right, this idea of what is my value?
Oh, yes.
And the wounds around that, right? So much of what we struggle with ultimately is in some way linked to feeling like we are not enough, or that others don't recognize our value.
Yes. Yes.
And it is loving that self through that pain, in a sense.
Exactly,
Anyway.
Sue. That's the Leo archetype. Loving myself despite whatever comes at me, whatever arises within me, resistance, self-judgment. Make love the default response to life.
Yeah, as we grow in life, we have to answer to so many other relationships. We have our work, we have our spouse, we have our for some people, children, which I have not at this, but yet it is very involved, where you live with the other neighbors, etc. And so we take all this into account, and then perhaps things didn't work out. And I mean, I'm just going through all the possibilities that begin to add up that make us feel we weren't enough. And it takes time to remember.
Well, and work so Go much ahead. Like sort of textbook Venus retrograde is, right? Like X's show up, right? Is sort of
exactly.
And so that can be very much a part of this Chiron, like unresolved pain around past relationships.
Yes.
And how much we carry that into future ones, and the need to heal that for ourselves and for a future partner, so we don't project an ex's behavior onto somebody who is not them and is not actually exhibiting the same behavior. We're just interpreting it through a traumatized lens.
Totally. I love that.
And this being the opportunity to heal that, because that's the beauty of Chiron.
Yes, exactly.
Thank
the
you.
Beauty of Chiron, Laura. Yes.
You're both beautiful. Here we have September 3rd, when Venus goes station direct. In other words, and that timing, like the automobile and the two vehicles going along at the same point, but now returning as it bends around in its orbit. This is perceived from Earth, folks. That's always our experience. Right. And that's going to be on the September 11th at 12 degrees, 12 minutes. Did I say, am 11. I getting?
Oh, it's on the 3rd.
Thank you thank you. That was a proverbial. Okay, on the 3rd. And at 9 in the evening at 19 minutes after and 52 seconds, because we have a podcast, people that can't see all this. And I hope that's right. But this relates to our shadow path going back to June 19th. It's been, again, a long series path, I might say. Leo, Venus entered Leo on June 5th or 6th, but as of the 12th was at 12 degrees. So this is like a final time to listen to our reassessments that we've had and moving forward. I don't know if there's any other thoughts.
Yeah. So on the same note, just following up from the last slide, because Venus will be trining Chiron and squaring Jupiter while retrograde, it means that when she stations direct right at this moment, from that point forward, she will revisit those same aspects to those same planets. Oh, yes. So during the retrograde, if something happens for you that you would correlate with Venus trine Chiron, or Chiron trine Venus, or Venus square Jupiter, it may not be the end of what's happening. It may just be like the dawning of the information, or like Laura was saying, the X shows up, or you discover you have an old debt that you didn't realize and is in accrued interest. That's another kind of negative side of Venus retro, things that you forgot about that are around your money and your value and people in your life and all that, they come back. Well, now is the time here when Venus hits the trine to Jupiter, the trine to Chiron and the square to Jupiter, again, now direct. Now is the time to make sure that you are really complete in whatever it is that was the work, the inner work, the issue, the resolution with another person, or even just if there's no resolution that can be attained mutually, just the letting go and literally surrendering and letting go and moving on at this time. And I on September 16th is when Venus at 15 Leo will be exactly square to Jupiter. So this will be the Jupiter square time. And then when Venus reaches the trine to from Chiron, it's just a couple days later on September 23rd. So there's a bigger window than normal between these two aspects that we have to work on this. And to me, that's like a gift.
It is. Thank you, Adam. Yeah. This is very illuminative to realize that this process, going back your first question with Laura about the archetypal consciousness, that Venus is offering us
ways to work through our emotional needs. It is emotional. Venus was the first. Well, the moon was actually the first. Well, who knows? Venus and the moon, they're huge as far as our mental and our emotional and our concerns. Laura, did you have a thought before I go on from this chart? Otherwise, I'm eager to get to our other points, but I'm always ready.
Well, so building a little, and we don't have the charts that you were mentioning on, but just looking like we're getting this closer and closer Sun Mercury conjunction with Mercury retrograde. So like as they're coming together and these aspects are revisiting, we may be able to find language or words for what we didn't have with the previous
I love that.
signature.
Wonderful.
Right. And
That's
so
great.
the gift of that, like simultaneous, right? We get sort of 2 weeks of them, both Mercury being retrograde and Venus being retrograde, but that with that Mercury Sun conjunction that's coming up from this third stationing, that now we can make them, and it's in Virgo, which just amplifies our ability to maybe make sense of what showed up for us a couple weeks before.
Yes, beautiful. So maybe it comes to more conscious awareness, like you're saying. I love that point. I love how you integrated the Mercury. That's I think a lot of people are going to be relying on this Mercury because a lot of these processes are very deep. They're subconscious. We don't have language for them. We don't even know they're going on.
No, it's true. It's true. It's one reason why we create, why we have poetry, why we have music, why we have all these endeavors that we're working to put pictures to, to understand. And I think too, we have a retrograde. Well, that will be ahead with Venus. Laura, you brought up, this is a profile from 2015, the last retrograde that Venus had. Oh, go ahead.
When it was in Leo, not the last time Venus was retrograde.
Well, I hadn't got that far yet. I had, yes, okay.
These are
clarity's sake. That was the point. Yes, go ahead.
Her retrogrades that involved Leo in any of our lifetimes.
Yes.
And so I just I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago in my neighborhood about the Venus retrograde, and so I was just looking at, because I find it. For ourselves, it can be interesting to look at, okay, what was happening in this window for me in 2015, because it will have some echoes, right? That sort of peeling of the onion. You may find similar themes because it's that we're going on for you the last time, because it's similar degrees, right? At least the last time, right? So it would have been going through the same part of your chart with these earlier retrogrades, or you can look at the degrees of it. But in just starting to look at it historically, I realized this is the first time in any of our lifetimes that the whole of the retrograde is in Leo.
And we'll get to that point ahead.
That's a brilliant insight. That's so good.
But it's always powerful to mention. Yes, because just to follow for the podcast people, if I may, Laura, these are Venus retrogrades in Leo, which I will, with Virgo, but it's in the historical framework from 2015 until 1959. Go ahead.
And to go further back, there wasn't anything in Leo, right? So that, like, before 1959, none of the...
Well, it's because it's 100-year, it's 100-year cycle with the Venus star point too. But
yes. So those are the only Venus retrogrades that have occurred in the lifetimes of anybody on the planet. Even if you were born in the 30s, these are the only ones that you've experienced.
Thank you.
Because you had to go back to the 1700s to get it again. So, but so just looking at it briefly, and we don't need to necessarily cover all the dates, but so the last time Venus was retrograde that involved any Leo, it was mostly Leo. She went retrograde at 0 degrees Virgo. So then very quickly was at 29 Leo. Mm-hmm. Hamilton opens during this for previews, and then on Broadway during this Venus retrograde. And it's interesting to look at, because like to remind people, like retrogrades get such a bad rap, like they're not a bad thing. Part of what Hamilton showed, it was a new way of communicating art, or this other form of Broadway, this other form of theater, talking about the past, which is retrograde.
Yes.
Right? Things that were
and showbiz, Leo, exactly.
In the past. And
stage.
And that both of those, the preview and its opening on Broadway, occurred during this period. And so just as a side, like, again, like retrogrades don't have to be a bad thing. The show opened with Venus retrograde, and it was one of the biggest shows in Broadway history.
Mm.
And in part, I think because it was so representative of the archetype that it was of that Venus retrograde, talking about the past through performance, through creativity, that it was embodying the archetype as opposed to trying to like resist it or yeah, that the comfort, not that catching of the wave as opposed to trying to fight it. And so there was other dates. So people who are watching the video, there's lots of different ones. If you want to just go back.
I will. And just
Sue?
to say, we have about 5 minutes and we want to get to the next
Okay.
one. So thank you. Just to,
But
as a
just
reminder.
because there was,
Good.
so just quickly, because this is really interesting to me. So the writer's strike, the last writer's strike happened just shortly after the Venus retrograde. So it's the last one. So it's interesting timing with what's going on with SAG and the writer's strike. And so,
Good
yes, so
point.
people can look at the slides with some of the
That's
other.
very powerful. I really appreciate this, Laura. In my hurry to go ahead, I want to recognize. And these dates are 2015, 2007, 1999, 1991. That's on the first slide.
Every 8 years, basically.
Yes, it is. But just, yes, exactly. And that idea of, it's so fascinating that the writers with Virgo and Leo, all about stage, the combination, it's very powerful. Shall I move to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then, so the Beatles, All You Need to Love hits #1 during Venus retrograde in Leo.
You are amazing. That is
Hawaii, since you're in Hawaii, Sue, right? Hawaii becomes
Yes,
the 50th
59.
state during a Venus retrograde in Leo.
So many people come here to get married. So many people come here for pleasure. It's synonymous in their minds. It's not, growing pineapples and coconuts.
So again, folks that are watching the video, just like looking at the dates and seeing, for the ones that you were alive for, what made the echoes of what might be showing up, how thematically, or just to understand some of how a Venus retrograde might manifest in your own chart, looking at these dates and tracking it with past life events.
I think it's fascinating, Laura, that you bring these up that illustrate the power of cinema, which we often think of as with Neptune, which is also very true, but it's stage and, theatrics, and that this, all that it, how powerful it implements or creates our ideas, our thoughts, like Jaws, scared forever, about the poor shark.
But it revolutionized cinema. I mean, that's part of
good point.
The reason for looking at Jaws was that as much as it looks very antiquated to us today, at the time it was cutting edge. At the time it was revolutionary, never been seen before creativity and ways of storytelling. It was breaking the mold.
Thank you, Dr. Tad. You do come up with beautiful things, and I love it. Shall we go on? In our conversation, we brought up 1772, which replicates very closely.
To the same exact degrees. It was the last time that Venus was retrograde at these exact degrees of Leo.
In fact,
exact degrees.
Yes, exactly.
28 to 12.
Right.
And it is the event shortly before it is the event that is historically thought to launch the Revolutionary War.
Exactly. In the preparation for that webinar I did a couple of weeks ago on the Dark Cross, I went back and I wanted to find the last time Venus stationed here. I kept going and going and going and going. Maybe I made a mistake in my research, but I went back 500 years from now and I still didn't find it.
Wow.
So
because I found there was a retrograde. Oh yeah, okay.
Yes. Yeah. So
yeah. And I might say that event when the Sons of Liberty attacked the Royal Navy schooner Gatsby, which you brought up, that prior to that there had been, and pardon us in England, but these are facts of severance, of that there was a massacre in Boston, not the Boston Tea Party, but the massacre in Boston. So tensions were evolving very strongly. And in 1771, just like last year, the Venus star point was shifting from its last 100 years, of
Scorpio to Libra, showing how powerful relationships might be. Here, I'm going to show you a couple of slides for people because we have about a minute and a half with the music. There's many similarities. Pluto and Capricorn squares the nodes in tension. The nodes are flipped, but that's powerful. Uranus is in Taurus, the same degree. Chiron in Aries within degrees. Mars squares Mars, both ruled by Gemini, which happen to be, in Mercury in Virgo. But the differences are that Venus ruled the North Node versus the South Node, and Mars also ruled different nodes. And so going ahead a little bit more, here is a chart for people to look at. Oh dear, and I didn't get the rest of it. Look at our events. Thank you so much, Adam. It's always an exploratory. And
thank you very much for the invitation, Sue and Laura. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And to our wonderful audience, see you again. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Minahan and her panel of guests connect soul growth patterns with the energetic cycles of astrology. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time to continue your journey through the roots of the cosmic pathway.